Welcome to your authentic path to powerful leadership with Marsha Clark. Join us on this journey where we uncover what it takes to be a powerful woman leader. Well, Marsha, welcome back. And we have a real treat today. I love it when we can bring in a guest to the podcast and get their personal experience and stories to bring this content to life.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and welcome back to all of our listeners. And I completely agree that it's always a treat to get to introduce our listeners to some of our very favorite people and the men and women who are living role models of our key messages and the lessons from our episodes.
So here we are, and this episode is entitled Being First. And so I'm guessing that has something to do with our guest today.
Well, I am just tickled pink. It sure does. So our guest today is Gail Picha Hays. And without spoiling too much of her story right here, I want to tease to say that she was the first female in a very male-dominated job back in the 70s, a job that was not only male-dominated, but also a very dangerous job. So we're going to hear about her lessons as she grew in her career and what it was like being a first, and also what advice she has for women today.
Well, very cool. And now I'm doubly intrigued. So let's introduce Gail and dive right in here.
All right, let's do it.
Well, we'd like to provide a little context for how our guests are introduced and connected to you, Marsha. So will you set that up for us?
So, Gail, as I look at your face on this screen, I can't wipe the smile off my face. So, Gail and I went to high school together at Galena Park High School, just outside of Houston. So I met her in the 10th grade, and we were in our high school drill team together, the Jacketeers, and we've kept up with each other over these last 50 plus years. With our reunions, and Gail and we call ourselves the Galena Park Goddesses. So it's our high school girls group. And so we've got some really deep roots for sure and think the world of each other.
Yes, we do. We absolutely do.
Well, Gail, welcome to the podcast. And it's not often that we get to dig into the Marsha history book with an actual witness. So even though the focus on this episode is on you today, I'd like to hear a little scoop on what you remember most about Marsha in high school.
Careful, Gail. You know a lot.
I'll clean it up the best I can. No, looking back, when you're in high school, you don't know what you have at the time. You're too young to appreciate anything. But looking back and then seeing where Marsha is now, this was meant to be. She was a leader in high school. We were, like I said, we were in the drill team together. And then our senior year, Marsha was the colonel of our drill team, and that's the leader. That's the top person. And she led our drill team. Like I say, it doesn't surprise me that she is what she is now, because this started a long, long time ago.
Well, Marsha, you've had a lifetime of working with some fascinating people. What is it about Gail's story that was so compelling to you that you wanted to include her in this podcast?
Well, first of all, this is about authentic leadership, right? Authentic path to powerful leadership. And when I think about what Gail how she's lived her life and what she's chosen to do with her life, it's pretty extraordinary. And, Gail, I think about it was us in Billy Don Hearn's, truck going to Huntsville with you and Cindy, your sister Cindy Picha, in the back. And she goes, you ought to interview Gail because she's done a lot of things in her life. And I thought that is where this, seed was born. And, Gail and I are from a generation where, quite honestly, women, we were told we could be anything that we wanted to be. And the reality was that when you looked around, we typically women were secretaries, nurses, teachers, and stay-at-home moms. Mm-hmm. And all of those are wonderful things. And yet, when you think about Gail going into the police force, that was really different. And I can't wait for her to tell you her story.
And who would have thought it?
I know.
Who would have thought that?
Well, that's right. And so she's one of the most responsible and trustworthy people that I know. And Gail, you really are. And you are a great role model and a real tribute to the police women that, you were part of the first wave of that, and they're a big part of our police force today.
So, Gail, let's just cut to it and let you share what your being first, which is the title of this episode, job was that was so unique, and then we can go back into it and hear the story.
Well, I started my career with the Pasadena Police Department. Now, just prior to that, I was working for the Houston Police Department, but as a civilian. I just needed a job with benefits. And so I was working in personnel and, typing and, answering phones and what have you. But our office was in the academy building attached to that. And I would go in the gym and eat my little peanut butter and jelly sandwich and watch all the cadets work out. And I said, I can do that. I know I can. And so during lunch, I started lifting weights and working out so I could pass the agility test. And Pasadena Police Department had a class coming up before the Houston Police Department did, because that's where I thought I was going. So I applied, I passed the agility test. And this would have been January of 1977 that I started the police academy. I can tell you the exact day. It was January the 24th, 1977.
Right.
I don't know how I remember that, but I do. And back then, the academy only lasted 4 months, the hardest 4 months of my life, without a doubt, because I was a single mom with 2 little kids. I had been divorced. And the guys, they had, some of them still lived at home with their parents. Some were married, but they had a wife to take care of things, and if they were single, they didn't have anything to take care of but themselves. But when I got done with my day of training, then I had to go home to 2 little ones and be mama and, feed them and get them ready for bed. And, then I started on it's college level studies. It really is. And it was usually 1 o'clock in the morning before I would get to sleep. And then I would get up at 5. So roughly 4 or 5 hours of sleep every night. And then when I got through with the academy, I was with a training officer, and you're supposed to do 6 months of training, riding with a senior officer, and you do 2 months on each shift. Well, there was 1 female on patrol at that time. There were only 4 in the whole department. 2 were in detectives, 1 was in juvenile, and 1 was on day shift. Well, so day shift was covered with the female that lived evenings and nights. So I started on nights and I went to evenings and I went right back to night shift. And they said, that's where you're needed. Well, they really didn't know what to do with me. The sergeants called me in that first night that the guys that I was with broke out, and they closed the door in the sergeant's office before we hit the street. And they said, do you want a partner? We didn't have partners. The only time you had a partner was when you were with a training officer, and then you were by yourself. And I said, well, is anyone else getting a partner? They said, no. And I said, well, then I don't want a partner. If I can't do it, I'm not going to do it, So to say I was nervous, that's an understatement. I remember, first of all, they would not let me work a district where there was a bar because the alcohol and what have you like that. So I was restricted on certain districts that I could work, which is, it's okay. Then I remember, this is over 40 years ago. I remember my very first traffic stop, and I stopped a guy on a motorcycle. I don't know what he did, maybe, ran a red light or something. So I was writing the ticket and running his, checking for warrants, and a police car, another unit, drove by very slow. And then I'm still writing the ticket, and then another unit drove by very slow. And this happened 3 times. And the guy asked me, he goes, so what's going on? I went, I don't know. I said, there's only me and 1 other car in this district. And 3 of them came by. And then I realized they were just checking on me.
Yeah.
And you know what? That didn't bother me one bit. I wasn't offended. It made me feel good, you know.
Good. So had you always wanted to go into law enforcement, Gail? Like, was this a dream of yours?
No, I actually, when Marsha was given the list of, I actually pictured myself being a nurse. I really did. My grandmother was a nurse, and I'm just that. Marsha knows me. I'm just that kind of person. Let me help you, you know. Yes. And I couldn't afford going to nursing school. I couldn't afford it. And when you're in the police academy, they pay you, and I look back, Social Security printouts that they give you. My last year that I worked for the Houston Police Department, I made $6,000 that year.
Yeah.
$6,000. Wow. My first year with the Pasadena Police Department, I doubled. I made $12,000. And to me, that was a lot of money. But that it ended up, no, it wasn't where I thought I was going, what I thought I was going to do, but it ended up being me.
Yeah.
It was me.
Well, and I want to say something too for our listeners and the people who are watching this. This was a different time for women. I mean, when you think about, there were 4 women total, and you couldn't do this, and they were watching out for you on that. It may sound strange for our listeners today, and yet I appreciate what Gail's saying about somebody's looking out for you. I mean, you hear so much about I've got your back, and the importance of that in the dangerous positions that policemen and women are put into, and so the idea of knowing that they were there to look out for you, and I'm sure they teased you and did all that kind of stuff, but then also just the sheer necessity of what she was going through. And Gail, I know you have a story that kind of leads to that sheer necessity, and I think that's important for you. You've overcome a lot to get to that place, and so if you're willing to share some of that, I'd love for our listeners to hear that.
Well, there were so many things that you don't think about. One of the things that was the necessity was searching female prisoners. And guys can't do that. Well, if I was off duty, being the only female on the shift, the females would rotate, taking a week at a time, being on call to be called in to search a female prisoner. So if you were on call, you couldn't leave town. You couldn't, do much, but be. And in my case, with 2 little kids, and it was just me, when they would call me at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to come in and search a female prisoner, then I had to take my little kids, put them in the car, drive to the station, in their pajamas, and I would go in. It was a Sally Port and a drive-through, and I would drive my car in there that normally is for police cars,
right?
But I would drive it right there by the door, and I would go get the officer that was working the jail. I said, "Go watch my kids, so I can go in and search your prisoner." And they did. They worked with me. I worked with them, and or just things like that. That was a necessity. And now I will say there were some of the older guys that they didn't think women should be. They didn't think women should be out in the workforce. I mean, like we're saying, it's a back in the day type thing,
right.
And then to be doing that was, even. Well, it was. They had to get used to, and in that job, I had to prove myself, and that didn't bother me one bit. They were depending on me. They were depending on me for their life, and it didn't offend me one bit for them to have to prove myself,
Yeah, and Gail, I'd love for our listeners, and again, going back to especially our younger listeners and thinking about, as a divorced woman, that in and of itself was fairly unusual back in those days. And, there weren't all-night daycare babysitters, all those kinds of things. So you had to have some sort of support system. So when you think about your support system, in addition to the policeman who's working the jail that night to come watch your kids, I mean, what did you do with all of that?
Well, my parents were, they were very supportive. And they helped me a lot. I ended up, I tell you what, God works in ways that we don't understand. But the house that I grew up in Galena Park, 4 houses down from my mom and dad, this house became available for rent.
Yeah.
So I rented that house. And, there were plenty of times that my mom and dad helped me out. And funny story, my daddy got a scanner, police scanner, and he listened to that all the time. Yeah. I mean, and I remember there was times that, things would happen and I'd be hollering for help or whatever. I'm thinking, oh, I hope daddy's not listening. I hope he's already asleep,
right.
Yeah.
But when I think about women who were first in those periods of time, we had to have a lot of support and people who believed in us, because there were those who were willing to give us a shot, and there were those who were just trying to prove every step of the way that we shouldn't be doing whatever it is that we were going to be doing. So when you think about, I think about the physical work that you had to do to be a policewoman, and how everything from whether the uniforms, the hats, the bulletproof vest, all those kinds of things, they weren't necessarily built for women. So talk about that a little bit.
We've come a long way there, believe it or not. And I talk to the female officers now, and they go, "What? They didn't make." I wore a men's small. That's what they ordered for me. I mean, right. Marsha, I was small.
Yes, you were.
Well, I was 5'6", and I probably weighed 100. Well, after I got out of the academy with all where I probably weighed 110 pounds, Right. And so, I would have to roll up my sleeves, and, ordered the vest. Finally, they ordered a female vest with the little cup. I know, with the little cups, because I was just wearing what they had, right. And the vest that fit me, was for a man, but. And believe it or not, the belt that you wear that's got all it's called a Sam Brown. You put the holster on and all that kind of stuff, that big thing. There was called a Sally Brown that they had invented. And the Sally Brown, now when I first went, they didn't have that. Then they came and I said, I want one of those. It had kind of a little, they went out over the hips because the guys, they're down. And I had little indentions, even little dark spots on my hip bones where it would just dig into me. So finally, I ended up getting that. So it took a while, but that was okay. I wasn't there. My purpose wasn't to try to prove anything to me or anybody else. I realized it did. That that paved the way for others. But I was there I was fulfilling a calling at that point. I was doing a job that I felt like now I'm going to get a little I was put there for a reason.
Yes, you were.
Right.
Yes, you were.
So, Gail, were you nervous about being a female in such a male-dominated job? What kind of support did you have, if any?
In the emotional side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, in the very beginning, they didn't know. They hadn't worked with females before, and even the citizens. Well, one time they sent me out on a call. It was a little juvenile disturbance, neighborhood disturbance. It was an older man. They were their ball would go in his yard, and they would go in the yard, and they were being anyway. He called in and get these kids out here type things. And back then, if you called, you got somebody out. So I knocked on the door, and he came to the door and he said, "Can I help you?" And I'm in full uniform. And he says, "Well, did you call the police?" I said, "Didn't you call the police?" He said, "Yeah, I called for a policeman." I said, "Well, that would be me." And he said, I want a policeman. And he was an older man. Honestly, I'm not, but I'm just telling you the way it was.
The way it was.
Not a problem. I got back in my car. I told the dispatcher, I said, this man would like a male officer. He doesn't want a police woman. And they said, that's clear. And they called him, because you call in and they say, look, she's the officer in your district and you get what you get. And it wasn't, it obviously, if it had been a dangerous thing or something like that, I would have, I would have called somebody, whatever it took. But, it was just a kid thing. And, but it was just, things like that. There's an incident one time that I think back after Marsha asked me to join in, and talking about the guys getting used to it, some of the older guys. I was working dispatch in the beginning, because we didn't have civilians doing it. The officers did dispatch, jail, whatever. There weren't civilians doing those jobs like they are now. And so I was answering the phones. There was two of us, and one of the male officers, he was doing the dispatching. And he was old school. And we were talking, and he says, well, he says about female officers. And I said, well, let's just talk about that for a minute. I said, if you have a job that you need done and you've got, let's say, people working for you, and one's a male, one's a female, and you've got a ditch to dig or whatever, takes strength. I said, and your two workers, what if the guy is only like about 5'6" and weighing about 130, 140 pounds, and they send you this female and she's 5'11", 6 foot tall, and she weighs about 200 pounds. I said, who do you think is going to be able to do it? And he didn't really have an answer for that, And I said, and let me ask you something else. I said, if you're in trouble out there on the street, who do you want to come help you? I said, or, you get in a shootout or whatever, something really bad. I said, do you want Barney Fife or do you want Annie Oakley to come help you?
I love it.
And we got, that broke the ice.
Yeah.
That broke the ice. We got to be friends. And I will say there wasn't any putting me down or anything like that. It was just
learning.
They didn't know.
Yeah.
It was a learning experience for everybody, you know?
So Gail, you can talk about, kids, throwing balls in grumpy old men's yards and all those kinds of things. But I also know that you got called in on whether it be some domestic violence cases or, thinking about women who had been raped or molested, and that those are such, I'll call them fragile situations. And tell us a little bit about where you saw the role for a person like yourself in a way that made all the difference in the world.
Well, I learned very quickly, and we don't think about these things unless we're actually involved in it. But let's just take, for instance, a sexual assault. Okay. One instance in particular that happened very early on. I was still in the police academy, and I hadn't even graduated yet. I wasn't an officer yet. And I was at the end, right before you graduate, you ride with another officer, but you're just supposed to observe. You're not supposed to radio. You're not supposed to do anything. You're just supposed to observe, kind of get you prepared. They gave us, of course, because I had female riding with this officer, they gave us an aggravated sexual assault at an apartment complex. We got there. And it was very obvious that it had occurred. There was, you could tell there had been a little scuffle there, some furniture moved around, what have you. And the officer, he was, thank goodness it was him, because he said, can you tell me what happened? He had his little notepad, and she goes, I'll talk to her, but I'm not talking to you.
Right.
And he said, not a problem. He put it back in his pocket. He stood on the porch, closed the door, and it was just she and I. I'm thinking, oh man, talk about getting thrown into the fire.
Right, the deep end,
But you know what? There was a reason for that too, because she had just been assaulted by a male. And no matter what you say about it, no matter how you try to justify whatever, well, male, female, or whatever, if it had been my sister, I would want a female to be the first one that she talked to and make her comfortable.
Right.
And it's not always that way. If I'd been off duty, if there's not a female on duty, you have to. Now, it's way different. It's specialized, and you get what you need, and it's way different. Thank goodness for the victims, that it is, and I could just go on and on about that. One of the cases I had. Now they've got sexual assault actually divisions within like the district attorneys and stuff, like the prosecutors. That's what they do, because that's a tough case to try. Somebody that is not, I'm not going to say not everybody can do it, but it takes some expertise.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because you cannot try those cases like every other case.
Right.
And they have those now. And I actually, again, got at work. There was a case that fell in my court, and I ended up knowing her, the victim. And how does that happen?
Yeah.
And I went to school with her, and I've told Marsha about this. I don't use names, but I stayed with her every step of the way, every step of the way. And I think that through a horribly tragic thing to go through, it helped.
I can only imagine, Gail, your compassion and your sense of responsibility, and you are a helper. You are there for everybody. So I can imagine how critical that was at a time that was beyond compare. Yeah.
So Gail, what do you think made you so successful as a police officer and then later as an investigator, especially considering that you were operating as a first, if you will, and often an only in such a male-dominated world?
I've thought about that, because we've, Marsha and I've talked about these things. And the only thing that I can come up with, this job is not for everybody. It is not, because it's not just, earning it is a way of life. It really is. What made me, I'm not saying I'm any better, what made me good at it, I don't know if it's, I don't know. It was in my heart. Like I said, it's a calling. The prosecutors, that's a calling, because they can get out of law school and go up there and make way more money and do a lot less work, because they've got file after file after file, stacked up. And I don't know that I'm any different than anybody else, any better than anybody else, but it's that I can only say that it's a calling that it's not for everyone. It's just not for it. What made me good at what I did, I don't know. It's in the heart. It's in the heart.
Wow. I want to say too, Gail, I think that one of the things that stands out so much for me about your story is you weren't there to make a statement about feminism or about, women can do this and watch and learn. I mean, I think for so many women in this generation, and that were so many in the first, being a first, that it was about, we just wanted to take care of our families. We wanted to make a contribution. We were in situations where we had to fend for ourselves, and we did the best we could. And if we had good support systems, that was great, or we just tried to help each other in whatever way we could. And I look at it, and yet it's in retrospect, or it's upon reflection, that we really begin to understand what was happening for us in that time, because we weren't conscious about it. Right. We were just trying to live a life and do the best that we could with that life that we had been given. And when I think about you as a divorced mother of 2 baby girls, and, taking your babies in pajamas to the police station when you needed to, and all of those things. And I know that your children are dear and they're precious and they're wonderful adults today because of the role model that you were. So, I mean, Gail, I appreciate you telling your story today. And I don't know, is there any advice that you would give to women? Because believe it or not, Gail, there are still women who are being first, right?
You bet. And, just to add to what you're saying, I'm like I said, I'm not unique. You can do anything that you put your mind to.
Yes.
You try hard enough. You put the work into it that it takes, and it takes a lot of sacrifice to be able to do some of the jobs that women are doing now. It comes at great sacrifice. You're missing some of the things with your children and, things like that. But I guess the one thing I could say in being the first, at anything, or one of the first, don't give up.
Yeah.
You follow your heart. If you try something, it doesn't work out, then go to the next thing and find your niche, find what you're good at, because we've all got that unique characteristic, I'm going to call it, that's waiting for you, and you can do it. You can do anything you put your heart at.
Yeah. I have to tell you, with our Galena Park High School girls, it's fun when we get together because Gail teaches us about what we have to do to be safe. Suzanne is our nurse in case anything goes wrong with any of us. Karen Ann's our teacher. She does this. Trudy, she's our accountant. Sherry's our banker. Shelley's our retail person. I mean, we've got these women who
all walks of life. Anything you can think of, right?
It is. And when you think about where the decades in which we lived, in which we came of age and, adulted and all of those kinds of things, it's a pretty amazing time and an amazing set of accomplishments that the women have. Gail, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Marsha. It's always fun, but it's always warms my heart when I'm with you.
Yes, for sure.
Well, we usually wrap up our shows with a little bit of the key takeaways from this episode. And I'm going to share mine first, and then Marsha, if you can share yours, and Gail, if you have one, we'd love to hear yours too. So my takeaway from today is, Marsha, you say this a lot, and if it's not a magnet, it should be, but something about the fact that we are standing on the shoulders of the women who came before us. And Gail obviously has some very strong shoulders, because I feel like I'm standing on some pretty big shoulders here.
Well, I love that, and yes, whether we knew we were standing strong and that our shoulders would be required, I'm not sure, but we are standing on those shoulders. And Gail, again, I just say I admire and respect that you did hard things. You did really hard things physically, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, and dare I say spiritually, and yet it was all in service to your family and to your daughters. And that what you did, though, was to show the way to so many other women and be a model of work hard and keep trying. Don't give up. Keep trying.
I believe that just thinking about this, I'm talking about things that I did when we're talking about the being the first of, over 40 years ago when I first started in 77. And then where we are today, talking about that. And 40 years from now,
right,
women will be talking about us.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's always evolving, and we're always helping to what's going to come in the future.
That's right. I think about your daughters. I think about your granddaughters. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're a great model for them, Gail. Love you.
Okay, I love you too, Marsha.
Well, thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us today on our journey of authentic, powerful leadership. And obviously, we have a prime example of a woman who has been first. And Marsha, I'm going to let you close us out.
Well, again, thank you, listeners. I'm so proud to share Gail's story with the world, and I hope you take it to heart and see possibilities in it for yourselves as well. Because as I said, there are still women who are being first or onlys or one of few or whatever that might be 40 years later from Gail's timing. And I thank you, my dear friend. I love you, my dear friend. And, even as I think about Gail and myself, I also think about our Galena Park goddesses. There's a whole story behind that. So, we'll go there some other time. But it is about, and as I always close these sessions, it is about here's to women supporting women. Thank you all.